Hi, Roy here on my channel Roy Reads Anything, where I talk about enjoying old books and other reading stuff. And coming up to the end of July, it's Booktube at War. Booktube at War has been the event of this month, which I wasn't initially going to do, but I've ended up doing some things anyway. So yeah, so this was an event conceived by viewer DDB, who Malcolm K. Vaughan then kind of put it out to the world of Booktube. So I think the idea is to read pretty much anything about war in any of its incarnations. Could be made up, could be historical, could be factual. Although it is interesting because it's like both horrendous and fascinating, and is often a feature of all sorts of stories, as well as being a sort of perennial genre in its own right. So one thing I did was to pop into a shop and buy this month's crop of Commando Comics. So these are British comics. They're now branded as action and adventure rather than specifically war, but they tend to be war-focused books. Just to give you an idea of the size, here's an American comic, and here are these. So you see they're quite sort of small and square compared to US ones, and each book has an individual story, quite long, 63 pages. So you might get recurring characters, but you can't quite predict. You know, they just come back. So oh, there's that again. So there are serials, but they sort of run over over long periods. But basically, what you're getting each 2 weeks is a selection of stuff, and the plan at the moment is you get 2 reprints and two new stories. So given that they've been going since the early 60s and we're up into the 5,000s, obviously there's a great legacy to draw upon, as well as new creators doing stuff. So normally I'd probably pick up one or two that appealed to me, but this time, as it's Booktube at War, got all 4. So you've got a Traitor's Gold reprint. The painted covers are a feature. They're sort of partially wraparound as well, and then you get this Commando dagger device on the back and a bit of a blurb. So Traitor's Gold was a great story, quite an epic story of some set in Greece. There's a shipment of gold that's meant to be going somewhere, and then it gets stolen. You know, there's the traitor is trying to steal it, and there's all sorts of people trying to sort of chase after it. So lots and lots happening. Black and white, typical sort of 2-panel grid per page. You might get more panels, or you might even get a big splash page, and you always ending up with a big splash page at the end. So Traitor's Gold, enjoyed that. So that's the gold collection, they'll be the oldest ones. You also get the silver collection, Guerrilla. So this was a story set in Italy, and again involved plot, lots going on. I think there's a focus on historical accuracy, and it's quite stereotypically, people imagine them being full of square-jawed Brits saying things like "ye gods" and shooting lots of Germans, and it all being very cliched. And you probably could find some of the early ones that were like that, but they often tend to be, I'd say, if there is a typical story, it will be quite character driven and often about the relationships between maybe 2 people who are rubbing up against each other in some way. Like I say, with the sort of historical backgrounds, and you know, I guess art wise as well, there's a big focus on like drawing the equipment properly. So Guerrilla was good. Then moving into the new stories, Cadman the Fighting Coward. set in the First World War, and this is resurrecting a character that used to be in The Victor. So The Victor was a weekly British comic, again focusing on war stuff. I read it like in the 70s. I didn't even realise it had been going into the 90s, but this is a 90s character being brought back into this format. Little bit like Flashman, in that you've got this character who is cowardly, who nevertheless finds themselves in situations where they're perceived to be, have been heroic, even though they absolutely weren't. I found this very grim. Just the depiction of the sort of turn towards mechanized warfare and the toll that takes on people's bodies, and the death counts, and just the kind of disparity between the sort of on the one hand you might have sort of glory hunting officers, and then you've got the guys on the ground who have to do the actual work, sort of thing. So suitably, given the subject matter, suitably testing. That was Cadman the Fighting Coward. I suspect going to be a character that does reappear. And then another thing you usually get in your quartet of comics is something that's a little bit non-standard, that isn't service people in uniform. I should say also, in terms of Commando as a whole, not just male characters, not just male creators. Lots of interesting stuff happening in more recent times with female leads and some female creators doing cool stuff as well. Yes, so a non-standard thing is the Amazing Armond. So this is a story, a caper, really. You know, I suppose that's another thing about World War II in particular, is it's become a sort of backdrop to adventure stories. Certainly was when I was growing up. You know, you could quite happily have a family movie like Hannibal Brooks with Oliver Reed and an elephant, and loads of German soldiers are just killed and fall over like nine pins, and that was good, wasn't it? I think things might have changed a little bit now, in that big movies would tend to be more like horrors of war. Anyway, yes, The Amazing Armond. It's about a French magician, a stage magician, he's not very good. His tricks usually go wrong, but he ends up being co-opted to be part of a mission to behind enemy lines to kidnap a German general. And there's some lovely artwork, you know, very much sort of a manga style. So yeah, great cover painting. It's story by Brent Towns. Brent Towns, who has been known to watch videos on this channel. Oh, so and that was talking about his westerns, but yeah, art by Luis Hernandez, cover by Neil Roberts, keeping the tradition of the painted covers going. So Commando Comics, obviously with these 5,000 plus issues, there's lots of second-hand ones you can pick up as well. So and I think this, I always say this, but this 60-page format of this size is very much a sort of a British tradition of printing. You can find what we were looking just the other day at the Schoolgirls' Own Library in exactly this format. So that's the thing. If these ever finish, it'd be like the Ravens leaving the Tower of London. The country would just have to disappear. So that was part of Booktube at War. Mentioned before, Tank issue. What is the Tank 1, Tank number 1 in a series, and it's called Tank, and it gave me an earworm that hasn't gone away, of the Wings song Jet, with Tank instead of Jet, which doesn't really work because Paul McCartney's pun on the word suffragette doesn't work with. Yeah, there is no such thing as a suffratank. Although a suffratank could actually be quite a good thing. Yeah. You could imagine like Tank Girl time travelling back to Edwardian England, and
that would be brilliant. You see, I'd read that.
Yeah. So suffratank. It's nothing whatsoever to do with this book, except in my mind. I picked it up because it looked like one of the sort of quite exploitative paperback series you got in the 70s, on a war theme, but it turned out to be more of a serious men caught up in crazy situations kind of drama. There's actually two main narratives. So there's the Allied group who are in a tank, and they're like no account guys who just trying to survive really, and they're lost and got to get through the desert. The other storyline is a German major who's trying to deal with the hierarchy to get tanks to go to the North Africa theatre of war, which apparently that was like, no, we're not interested in that. Eastern Front's where it's at. So it's odd. I found myself quite invested in, oh, how's he going to get around that problem and actually get the tanks? I thought, well, hang on, he's supposed to be the enemy. And also, it's like, how on earth are these two stories? One's very sort of senior guy doing big stuff, and then there's the motley crew. You always have a motley crew. The tank guys, how are they going to end up together? And it does happen, and the action scenes are great. It's the mechanization of war and how sort of terrible that is. The ingenuity of the mechanical devices and vehicles, coupled with their sort of fallibility and problems, and the workarounds people would have to do to sort of make them work and survive in them. Thought that was all really interesting. I bought the other two, Tank 2, Fortress Eagle, and Tank 3, Sugar Sugar. Probably nothing to do with the Archie's song of that name.
I was just going to start singing it, but I held back.
That would be a better earworm, I think.
Sugar, oh.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's a classic pop song. No, nothing gets cut out. So, David Williams, who I've not really been able to find out anything about, Tank series. And all of this North Africa stuff made me think of something my dad turned me on to, which was some cartoons, John's The Two Types. So the Two Types were these characters who were created for the 8th Army newspaper. So they were published at the time out there, read by the military. And they're basically two officers, and apparently the kind of the types, they're never named, but their look and demeanour and the way they carry on and the way they speak apparently were highly recognisable. So much so that all sorts of different divisions, battalions, whatever it was they had, would sort of say, oh yeah, they're based on the real ones are actually in our unit. So part of the gag is that they've been out there in North Africa so long that their approach to uniform is become sort of somewhat non-standard, in that they've adopted into their style things like wearing comfortable desert boots from the market instead of the issued boots, corduroy trousers, sort of scarves and bits and pieces they might have picked up, things like tank goggles and flying jackets. So they got this sort of rather absurd look that they kind of carry off. This one's contrasting that with a properly dressed newcomer to the area. So apparently there was some sort of huffing and puffing about mocking the officers, but then some general said, yeah, the two types were worth by themselves a division of troops to the Allied forces. So they were super popular, and some of the cartoons are kind of timelessly funny. Others you pretty much had to be there, or you can sort of decode them and figure out what they're on about. So I've learned all sorts of things of the time of how there were some cigarettes called V's like V for Victory, apparently were terrible but also if you got so habituated to them, that would be all you would want to smoke.
I bet
And
they weren't as horrible as those papyrosi things we got in Leningrad.
Russian papyrosi. Yeah. Well, I think they were of the same order.
Right.
So
right.
papyrosi are like, you get a long cardboard tube and a short bit of tobacco at the end, and it would kind of fizz and pop because there's so much saltpeter in it, and be rough as anything.
Oh, well, it's the worst smoke I've ever had.
Let's not get into the world of smoking.
Bygones.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I suppose. But yeah, I'd recommend this to anyone who's interested in sort of war history and or cartooning, because the cartoonist has to distill so much down into like one panel. There's got to be lots of, although it looks really simple and it's like, well, he's just come up with a little gag, but without all of that background stuff being sort of pulled into it, it doesn't work. Wouldn't have that recognition factor. And yes, our various divisions might have claimed they thought they were real. I went to a military thing with my dad once. It was like a veterans event with hundreds of people, and there was a guy there who pretty much looked like this. He had the moustache, he had the demeanour, and he was wearing some kind of rather ridiculous looking field coat. So I think the two types, appropriately enough, at some point passed through the barrier from sort of archetypes into manifesting in the real world. So that was my Booktube at War selections. And just to finish, a random sentence from a sword and sorcery book. The stone building was 2 stories and sprawled almost 60 feet at its longest side.